Commander looked down at the planet below through the viewport of his battleship. The world was called New Haven by the humans, a colony world on the edge of settled space. Had seen thousands of worlds in his long military career. Most of them were not worth remembering. This one would not be worth remembering either. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for more than 3,000 years, served that empire with pride. He was a commander of considerable rank with a fleet of 12 warships under his control. His armor was polished to perfection. His mind was sharp and trained in the art of conquest. He had defeated many enemies. He had never lost a battle. Below, the human colony went about its ordinary business, watched the thermal signatures of their buildings. He watched their shuttles move between the settlements. The humans were like insects to him, small and simple and beneath serious notice. They had reached only a primitive level of space travel. Their weapons were ancient by standards. Their shields were weak. Their armies were nothing more than scattered groups of untrained beings. Had received his orders 2 days before. The High Command wanted to demonstrate the strength of the Empire to the humans. They wanted to show why the humans should submit to rule. Was ordered to attack New Haven and destroy the colony if the humans resisted. The task seemed almost too easy. It was boring, but orders were orders. He called his weapons officer to his side. The officer was a tall with battle scars across his thick green skin. The officer's name was Vane, and he had fought in many campaigns across the galaxy. "Target the human settlements," said. "Prepare for orbital bombardment. I want to hit them hard enough that they understand they cannot resist us." Vane looked at the planet and then back at his commander. "Commander, their settlement is small. Our weapons will destroy it completely. There will be no humans left to surrender." Made a gesture that meant Vane's concern was foolish. Then there will be no humans left to resist. Either way, the mission succeeds. The Empire has shown its strength to this part of space. That is all that matters. Vane bowed and returned to his station. He began entering commands into the weapons systems. The ships in orbit adjusted their positions. Targeting systems locked onto the human colony. Below on the ground, Captain Hayes was having a meeting in the colony's main command center. The command center was a small building in the middle of the colony. It was the most advanced structure the humans had built on New Haven, but knew that it was nothing compared to the ships now in orbit above them. Was a tall human with dark hair that was turning gray at the sides. He had served in the human military for 30 years before taking command of the colony's defense force. He had seen war before, though never against an enemy as advanced as the. He had studied the records of military power. He knew what they could do, and he was afraid. His second officer, Lieutenant Grace Foster, was standing next to him looking at the sensor readouts. Grace was young and sharp. She had been born on a colony world and understood frontier life better than most soldiers. She looked at with worried eyes. "They are preparing to attack," Grace said. "I am picking up weapon charging patterns. They are targeting the main settlements." Closed his eyes for a moment. He had known this was coming. The ships had been in orbit for hours. They had not answered any human communications. Now they were preparing their assault. "Get me the civilian evacuation protocols," said. "We need to move every person we can into the underground bunkers that will destroy the surface structures. Our only chance is to protect the people underground." Grace nodded and began sending messages to the other colony leaders. The alarm system started to wail across New Haven. People in the streets looked up at the sky. They could see the ships now. They could see the moment their world changed forever. Walked to the main viewport and looked up at the battleships. He could see the light beginning to build in their weapons. He knew that in moments death would come raining down from the sky. He thought of his daughter, Emma, who was only 12 years old. She was in one of the shelters now with the other children. That was good. That was what he wanted. "Sir," Grace said, "the evacuation is moving faster than expected. We have about 15 minutes before the first bombardment hits. What are your orders?" turned away from the viewport. Get every person you can into those bunkers, then organize the defense teams. We will use the mining tunnels and underground passages. They have superior firepower, but we know this ground better than anyone. We will make them pay for every meter they take. Grace saluted and left to give the orders, remained at the viewport, watching the enemy ships prepare to destroy his colony. He knew that the odds were against them. He knew that humans were not as strong as. He knew that their weapons were not as advanced. But he also knew something that the commander did not. He knew that humans could be dangerous when they were fighting for their homes. He knew that desperation could make ordinary people do extraordinary things. The first explosion lit up the sky. The bombardment had begun. The colony's defenses tried to respond, but they were like trying to stop the ocean with a stone wall. Buildings collapsed under the weight of the weapons. Fires spread across the surface. The colony that humans had spent 10 years building was being destroyed in minutes. But the people were in the shelters now. That was what mattered. They were safe underground, and was already planning how to make the pay for their invasion. The battle had begun, and though they did not know it yet, they had just started a war that would change how they understood the galaxy. The bombardment continued through the night. The ships fired without stopping. They burned buildings and destroyed infrastructure. But Hayes was not thinking about buildings anymore. Buildings could be rebuilt. What mattered now was keeping them busy, while civilians remained safe in the deep bunkers below. By morning, the surface of New Haven looked like a destroyed world. Smoke filled the air. The colony buildings were mostly gone. They would see the destruction from orbit and believe they had won. They would think that the humans were defeated. That was exactly what wanted them to think. Deep underground in the mining tunnels gathered his defense teams. There were about 300 soldiers available. Some were trained military personnel like himself and Grace Foster. Others were colonists who had taken up weapons because they had no other choice. They were not much, but they were what he had to work with. "They will land ground troops soon," told them. "They will be confident. They will think we are already beaten. This is our advantage. We will use the tunnels to strike at their supply lines and landing craft. We will make them hurt. We will make them understand that attacking humans is not as easy as they thought." A young soldier named Park stepped forward. He was barely 20 years old, one of the colonists who had picked up a weapon. His family was in the deep shelters, his mother and his younger sister. "Captain, what if we fail?" asked. "What if they destroy us anyway?" Looked at the young man. "Then we fail, but we fail fighting. We fail protecting what matters, and that means we do not really fail at all. The humans in those shelters are alive because we are here. That is what success means to us. That is all that matters." Nodded. He did not look entirely convinced, but he accepted what his captain had said. The other soldiers seemed to accept it too. The first assault shuttle descended to the surface that afternoon. It landed near the ruins of the main colony center. Heavy armored soldiers emerged, each one standing 8 feet tall, each one carrying weapons that could cut through metal like it was paper. They moved in perfect formation, confident and strong. They found no enemies waiting for them. The surface was empty. Their scanners showed no human resistance. Commander watched from orbit and smiled. The battle was even easier than he had expected. The humans had been completely defeated by the bombardment. Then the tunnels beneath the position collapsed. The explosion was sudden and violent. The soldiers were thrown to the ground by the force of falling earth. 3 of them were killed immediately. The others scrambled to escape, but more tunnels were collapsing around them. They had walked right into a prepared trap. Watched from a hidden position as they ran in confusion. His teams had spent the early morning digging into the rock above where the shuttle landed. They had placed explosives carefully, calculated to collapse the ground beneath the landing zone. It had worked perfectly. More soldiers came down from the orbiting ships. They came in greater numbers, more heavily armed. But this was also part of plan. The more soldiers sent down, the more chances had to hurt them. Over the next 3 days, the pattern repeated again and again. They would advance. The humans would retreat into the tunnels. Then human soldiers would strike at supply lines and isolated groups. Every time the thought they had victory, they would find destruction waiting in the darkness. Grace Foster led a team of 15 soldiers through the mining tunnels beneath the main settlement. They moved quietly through the dark passages. Their lights were off. They navigated by the glow of thermal markers that the team had placed earlier. They were moving toward a fuel depot that had been set up near the colony center. "In position," Grace whispered into her communication device. Around her, the soldiers took their places. They had one chance to do this right. They had 3 soldiers guarding the fuel depot. They were standing together, talking in their own language, unconcerned. They did not think there were any humans left alive to threaten them. They did not expect danger. Grace gave the signal. Human soldiers opened fire. They never had a chance to fight back. Within seconds, all 3 were dead. The human soldiers rushed forward and placed demolition charges on the fuel storage containers. Then they ran back into the tunnels before reinforcements could arrive. The explosion of the fuel depot shook the ground. The blast sent flames high into the air. It destroyed 3 assault vehicles that were being prepared for the next attack. The resources needed for the advance had been destroyed in minutes. Commander received reports of these losses with growing anger. His casualty numbers were climbing. His supply lines were being destroyed. He was losing soldiers faster than he had anticipated. He blamed his officers for not being careful enough. He blamed the soldiers for not being strong enough. He did not blame himself for underestimating the humans. "Deploy ground units in stronger formations," ordered. "Search every tunnel. Find the human soldiers and kill them all. This colony will be destroyed, and I will not tolerate further delays." More soldiers came down from the ships. The numbers grew larger each day, but the humans continued to fight. They did not fight to win. They fought to survive. They fought to slow the down enough that the people in the deep shelters would not be found. Received reports each day. The forces were growing stronger. Soon they would have enough soldiers on the ground to search every tunnel thoroughly. Soon they would find the deep shelters. That was when everything would change. That was when the true battle would begin. Park was with when they received the final report. They had begun searching the lower tunnels. They would reach the shelters within 2 days, looked at his young soldier and saw fear in his eyes, but he also saw determination. "We make them pay," said simply. "We make every meter of ground cost them blood. We do not let them reach those shelters. That is our mission. That is what we live for." Park nodded. He understood now what his captain meant. They would fail or they would succeed, but either way they would fight. And that was all that really mattered to soldiers who had no choice but to be brave. The 5th day of fighting began with a critical discovery. Scouts found a group of soldiers separated from the main forces. Their communication equipment had been damaged in one of the tunnel collapses. They were lost and disoriented, moving through the underground passages without knowing where they were going. There were 7 of them, and they were young, barely into their military careers. Immediately realized the situation. He could order his soldiers to kill them. It would be easy. It would eliminate a tactical threat to the colony. Many of his soldiers expected him to do exactly that. But thought of something else. He thought of his daughter Emma in the deep shelters. He thought of Park's mother and sister. He thought of all the families hiding underground, waiting to see if they would live or die. He thought of how these young soldiers probably had families too, probably had people who loved them, probably had mothers and fathers who were worried about whether they would come home. "Contact them," ordered. "Tell them to put down their weapons. Tell them we will not harm them if they surrender." Grace Foster looked at her captain with surprise. "Sir, these are the enemy. They will report our strength and position to their command." "I know," said, "do it anyway." Grace made the communication. She spoke in the language which many human soldiers had learned to speak over the past 5 days of fighting. She gave the choice. They could put down their weapons and be protected, or they could keep fighting and die in these tunnels. For a moment there was silence. Then the soldiers came into view, their weapons lowered. They were scared. Their eyes showed that they had experienced real fear for the first time in their lives. The superiority they felt, the confidence that came from advanced weapons and superior strength, had been stripped away by 5 days of being hunted in unfamiliar territory. Ordered his soldiers to disarm them carefully. He had the soldiers taken to a shelter that had been prepared. Water and food were provided. Medical attention was given to those who were injured. The treatment was the same kind of treatment the humans would give to their own wounded soldiers. A young soldier named Vex, looked at the humans with confusion. "Why do you not kill us?" he asked. "We invaded your world. Our commander ordered the destruction of your colony. We killed your people." Sat down near the young alien. "Because killing you will not save my colony. Because I have a daughter in the shelters below, and I would want someone to treat her with kindness if our positions were reversed. Because mercy is not weakness. Mercy is a choice. And right now, I choose to show you that humans are not the primitive creatures your commander believes we are." Word of the captured soldiers reached Commander through his soldiers in the field. The message made him pause. The humans had captured his soldiers but had not executed them. The humans had provided them with shelter and medical care. This was confusing too. It did not fit his understanding of how warfare worked. Among the military culture, prisoners were a burden. They consumed resources. They provided no value. It was standard practice to execute them or leave them to die. The idea of actually protecting captured enemies was completely foreign to thinking. It revealed a fundamental difference between the two species that had never considered before. The young soldier Vex, from his shelter underground, was given the chance to send a message to Commander. In the message, Vex described his experience. He told his commander about how the humans had shown him kindness. He told him that the humans were not primitive or weak. He told him that the humans possessed a strength that the Empire had forgotten, if it had ever known it at all. Read the message in his command center high above New Haven. Something in those words disturbed him in a way he did not expect. For the first time in his long military career, felt something that was not confidence or superiority. He felt uncertainty. He felt something that was almost like fear. Meanwhile, on the surface, the battle was reaching its critical point. The ground forces had grown to over 500 soldiers. They were systematically searching the tunnel systems, knew that within hours the shelters would be found. The people hiding there would be in danger. He gathered his remaining soldiers. There were now fewer than 200 of them left. Some were killed in combat. Others were too wounded to fight anymore. But those who remained were still determined. "We are going to make our stand at the main tunnel junction," told them. "This is where we stop them. This is where we make them bleed. Every soldier we stop here is a soldier that is not reaching the shelters. Every moment we buy them is a moment of life for the people we love." Park was among the soldiers who would make this stand. He had survived 5 days of fighting, 5 days of moving through dark tunnels, 5 days of watching his friends die. He was tired and scared, but he was still there. Captain said, "What is our chance of holding them?" Looked at the young soldier. "Not good, probably not good at all, but we are going to fight anyway. That is what makes us human. We fight even when we know we might lose. We fight because giving up means that the people we love will suffer. We fight because it is the only thing that still makes sense in all of this." Park nodded. He pulled out a communication device and recorded a message for his mother and sister in the deep shelters. He told them that he loved them. He told them that whatever happened, he wanted them to know that he was proud to be their son and brother. He told them that he was going to hold the tunnel so that they could live. Then he took his position with the other soldiers. They prepared their weapons and their explosives and their traps. They waited in the darkness for the to come. They knew that they would lose, but they also knew that they would not lose easily. They knew that when received reports of what happened next, his entire understanding of human beings would change forever. The soldiers advanced into the tunnel junction where and his fighters waited, and the greatest battle of New Haven began. The tunnel junction erupted into chaos. Explosions tore through the formations. The humans had prepared the ground carefully, and now they used that preparation to maximum effect. Walls collapsed. Passages were blocked. The trained to fight in open spaces with clear lines of sight found themselves struggling in darkness and chaos. Moved through the tunnels like a man possessed. He had gone beyond fear into a state of pure action. He had seen too much death. He had lost too many soldiers. He had sent too many people to die so that others could live. Now it was his turn to stand in the line of fire and hold it. Grace Foster fought beside him. Her soldiers were firing from hidden positions, appearing and disappearing like ghosts in the darkness. They would strike from one direction and then fall back to prepared positions. They tried to push forward but found that every advance cost them soldiers. Park was in a position above the main tunnel passage. He had rigged a section of the tunnel ceiling to collapse at a specific moment. He watched as the forces gathered directly beneath it. He could see the moment. It was time. He activated the charges. The ceiling came down in a massive wave of rock and dust. Soldiers screamed as the earth fell on them. Dozens of them died in that moment, but Park knew that this was not the end. More would come. They always came. Commander watched the reports coming in from the ground. His soldiers were dying, not just a few. Many of them were dying, and they were not even reaching the human stronghold. The humans were inflicting heavy casualties at each position, each tunnel junction, each prepared defense. For the first time, began to understand that this was not going to be a simple victory. This was not going to be quick. The humans were fighting in a way that military doctrine had not prepared for. They were fighting from defensive positions. They were using the environment. They were fighting to the last soldier without surrender. Ordered his remaining soldiers to push harder. He ordered them to break through the human defenses no matter what the cost. He wanted this colony destroyed. He wanted the humans beaten. But most of all, he wanted to understand why the humans were not giving up. The battle raged through the night and into the next day, positioned himself at the final junction before the shelters. This was the place where he would make his last stand. That would have to go through him to reach the people he had sworn to protect. Around him were the last of his soldiers. There were about 30 of them left. All of them were wounded in some way. All of them were tired beyond anything they had known before, but they were still there. They were still ready to fight. Grace Foster stood next to. There were tears in her eyes, but her hands were steady as she held her weapon. "We are down to the end," she said. "Yes," replied, "we are." "Do you think we will hold?" Looked at his second officer. "I think we will hold as long as we can. That is all anyone can do." The assault came with tremendous force. Hundreds of soldiers poured through the tunnel toward the final defensive position. The humans opened fire. The tunnel became a hellscape of explosions and death. Both human and soldiers fell, but they were stronger and more numerous. They were pushing forward despite the casualties. Park moved to a tunnel junction where soldiers were trying to outflank the main position. He had one remaining demolition charge. He knew what he needed to do. He activated the charge and then threw it at the advancing. The charge was on a short timer. He turned and ran. Behind him, the explosion erupted. The soldiers in that tunnel were killed. But the charge was also larger than it needed to be. It was meant to kill as well. He had made sure of that. He had made his choice. He had given his life so that the soldiers at the main position could continue fighting. When learned that Park was dead, something inside him broke and reformed. The young soldier, barely 20 years old, had made the ultimate sacrifice. He had seen the mission and had understood what it would cost, and he had done it anyway. That act, that final choice, became the moment that the battle shifted. The soldiers who witnessed Park's sacrifice were shaken by it. In culture, soldiers did not sacrifice themselves. They fought for glory and advancement. The idea of a young soldier deliberately destroying himself to protect others was beyond their understanding. It was something that made them question everything they had been taught about strength and weakness. Stepped forward and led a counterattack. 30 tired, wounded humans charged at hundreds of fresh soldiers. They had no chance of winning, but they fought anyway. They fought for Park. They fought for every soldier who had died. They fought for the people in the shelters. They fell back, not because the humans were stronger, not because the humans had better weapons. They fell back because something in them had been broken. They had seen something that their training had not prepared them for. They had seen humans willing to die not for glory, but for others. They had seen humans willing to sacrifice everything. Received the report that his soldiers were retreating. For the first time in his long military career, felt real fear. Not fear of weapons or of defeat in the traditional sense. He felt fear of something he did not understand. He felt fear of a strength that did not come from technology or genetic enhancement. He felt fear of a species that possessed something his own people had lost. He ordered his forces to hold their positions and await new commands. Then he sat alone in his command center and looked at the reports from the battle. Thousands had died. Thousands more were wounded, and the humans, with their inferior weapons and their smaller numbers, were still fighting. Emerged from the tunnel junction. His armor was burned and torn. His face was bleeding. He was breathing heavily. Around him, the remaining human soldiers looked as destroyed as he felt, but they were still standing. They were still alive. Grace Foster looked at her captain. "What now, sir?" Looked back toward the shelters where thousands of civilians were still waiting. "Now we wait. We see if they have learned what they came here to learn." Commander made his decision. He was a military commander, trained in logic and tactics. But he was also intelligent enough to recognize when he faced an enemy he could not defeat, not because of weapons or numbers, but because of something deeper. He contacted the human command through a secure channel. "I wish to speak with you later," said. "I am ready to negotiate." The fear that had felt was not the fear of death. It was the fear of understanding that his entire worldview was wrong. It was the fear of meeting a species that possessed a kind of strength the Empire had forgotten it could have. The meeting took place in a neutral chamber. Came with only Grace Foster at his side. Commander came alone. The two leaders of opposing forces stood facing each other, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Was exhausted and wounded. His uniform was torn and covered with dirt and blood. His eyes were hard from days of making decisions that had led to the deaths of his soldiers. But there was also something else in those eyes. There was clarity. There was the look of someone who had been tested and had not broken. Looked at the human captain and saw something unexpected. He had fought many enemies over his long career. He had seen courage in warriors of many species, but he had never seen the kind of determination that looked back at him from eyes. This was a being who had fought not for conquest or glory, but for people he loved. This was a being who had sent his own soldiers to die so that others could live. This was a being who understood sacrifice. "You should have surrendered," said. It was not an insult. It was a statement of fact. "We should have," agreed. "But we did not. Our people needed us to keep fighting, so we did." Nodded slowly. "I came to this world to demonstrate the superiority of the Empire. I came to show your people that resistance was pointless. Instead, I have learned something I did not expect." "What have you learned?" asked. "I have learned that your species is not primitive," said. "I have learned that you possess qualities that the Empire has misunderstood or forgotten. You value each other. You are willing to sacrifice everything for those you love. You show mercy even to your enemies. These things are not weaknesses. They are forms of strength that our weapons cannot measure." Said nothing. He waited for the commander to continue. Your young soldier, Park, destroyed a section of tunnel and killed himself in the process. He did this to protect your soldiers. In culture, this would be considered wasteful. The individual would have been expected to preserve his own life. But your people called it heroism. You called it sacrifice. And in that moment, I realized that we have been wrong about what strength means. Paused. I am ordering my forces to withdraw from New Haven. We will evacuate our troops from the colony. You have earned the right to survive. Felt relief wash over him. The battle was over. The colony would live. The people in the shelters could come back to the surface. The mission that he had fought for was complete. I have one request, said the young soldier, Vex, who was captured by your people. He has requested asylum. He wishes to remain with your colony instead of returning to the Empire. I am granting his request. I believe that he has found something among your people that he will not find among my own. Nodded. We will welcome him. He is brave, and he has shown respect when it would have been easy to show hatred. Turned to leave, then paused at the door. Tell me, Captain, why did you show mercy to our soldiers? You could have killed them, it would have been logical. Thought about the question. Because I am human, he said finally. Because mercy is what separates us from simply being killers with weapons. Because I wanted the soldiers to know that we are not the primitive creatures you thought we were. And because I hoped that someday you would understand that. Left the chamber. Within hours, the battleships began to withdraw from orbit. The evacuation of their ground forces began immediately. The humans watched from the colony as the enemy ships climbed toward space and then disappeared into the darkness. The shelters were opened. Thousands of civilians emerged to see their world transformed by battle. Most of the colony buildings were destroyed, but something was also intact that mattered more. The people were alive. The colony had survived. Called a ceremony to honor the dead. More than 200 human soldiers and civilian defenders had died in the fighting. Park was among them. Emma, daughter, placed a flower at the memorial where the dead were remembered. She did not completely understand what her father had done, but she understood that he had saved her life and the lives of thousands of others. Grace Foster was promoted to captain and given command of the colony's rebuilding efforts. She worked to establish new defense systems and to create communication links with other human colonies. They shared the knowledge they had gained from fighting They taught other humans that resistance was possible. They taught that humans had strength that no alien enemy could completely overcome. Vex, the young soldier, worked to establish contact with Commander. Over time, the two commanders began a correspondence. It was not friendship exactly, but it was mutual respect. Shared his own observations about human strength. Shared information about human culture and values. The most important conversation came many months later, when was back on the addressing the military high command. He told them that the Empire had made a critical error. They had measured strength only in terms of weapons and technology. They had not recognized the strength that came from sacrifice, from loyalty, and from love. The humans of New Haven defeated us, said to the high command. Not because their weapons were superior, not because their tactics were perfect, but because they were willing to die for something greater than themselves. They were willing to sacrifice individually for the survival of their group. This is a form of strength that the Empire has forgotten or never possessed. The word spread through the military and then throughout their society. For the first time in 3,000 years, the idea that the way was not the only way, the best way, began to take root. On New Haven, the colony rebuilt itself. Humans worked alongside Vex to create a bridge between the two species. The scars of battle remained visible for a long time, but the physical structures were rebuilt and improved. New gardens were planted where weapons had fallen. New buildings rose where old ones had been destroyed. Stood with his daughter Emma and looked out at the rebuilt colony. In the distance, he could see other settlers arriving from Earth and from other human colonies. New Haven was growing again. New Haven was becoming a symbol of human resilience and human value. Emma asked her father, "Will they come back?" Thought about the question. "I do not think so," he said. "Not as enemies, not after they learned what we really are." In the Empire continued his work to change how his people understood strength and weakness. It was slow work, and many commanders resisted his ideas. But gradually, the concept of human strength began to spread. More humans and began to work together. Trade routes were established. Diplomatic relationships began to form. The Battle of New Haven became a story that was told across the galaxy. It was a story of a small human colony that had defeated an empire's attempt to destroy it. But more importantly, it was a story of how one species had learned to fear another species not because of weapons, but because of values. It was a story of how humans had shown the galaxy what they truly were. Commander, looking at reports of these changes, finally understood what he had learned on New Haven. He had learned that fear was not always bad. Sometimes fear was the sign that you had encountered something greater than yourself. Sometimes fear meant that you needed to change. And on New Haven, he had learned that humans, with their willingness to sacrifice and their capacity for mercy, represented a form of greatness that no amount of technology could measure.